in all of this, one thing can be taken away, that the PLA is no longer trying to be a force which is just quantity. And the theaterization itself spoke to that. But with this parade, we know that they're very serious about it, because there were a lot of layoffs in the process of theaterization. And yet, with the parade, we know that it's all about becoming a quality force over anything else. So they are more than happy to have drones do ISR, even engage in the kill chain if it's a very dire situation, and then humans come in and do the trick as necessary.
You're on the gist on Strat News Global. I'm Surya Gangadharan. Our focus in today's edition of the Gist is on a military parade that China held last week. September 3rd was the date marking the 80th anniversary of the victory over Japan in World War II. So China went to town with it. And from what I read and what I understand, the parade has gone viral. It's all over the place and is being commented upon for the signals and the various messages coming out of China to the whole world. We're going to break down this parade for you, and I have my expert standing by from Bangalore, Anushka Saxena, a young China scholar at the Takshashila Institution, who researches and writes extensively on China and the PLA, and has written about the parade itself. Anushka, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Anushka, this parade is, of course, the anniversary of China's victory over Japan in World War II. All that's okay, but leaving that aside, what is that big message coming out of China at this point in time?
Right. Thank you so much for that. So I think understanding the messages that were revealed at the parade, or at least what the intention was, is very important to kind of decode the rationale behind why this event was conducted. And it's not the case that this parade in and of itself was unique. Every 10th anniversary of the Chinese victory over what they refer to as the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression is commemorated. Again, similarly with formations and display of weapon systems. And then there are other parades, such as those that are celebrated for the founding of the People's Liberation Army on the 1st of August. Then there is the parade to mark the National Day on the 1st of October, and the War of Aggression parade. War of Resistance, pardon me, also happens regularly. But I think what was unique about this parade was just the sheer number of heads of state that were present. Uh, about 26 to 27, and covering all major regions, our neighborhood, East Asia, some countries in Europe, their heads of state, Latin America, Africa, so on and so forth. So they were all there, ASEAN leaders as well, right? And I think the timing in that sense was opportune, because the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit in Tianjin had just happened, and the parade happened shortly after. So they were given royal treatment, and there was also a gala event that happened on the evening of the 3rd September with the heads of state. Now, coming to the specific messages, so I would like to classify these according to the stakeholders to whom said messages were being sent. And the first is, of course, the citizens, the people, party cadres, and the military itself, right? So, if one looks at Xi Jinping's speech, which kicked off the parade, his continual emphasis was on talking about the spirit and resilience of the Chinese people, and how this is a parade to mark victory over quote unquote fascism. So, if we look at the world from Beijing's perspective today, there is increasing military and economic hostility, especially from the West, led by the US. And in such a scenario, it becomes very important for something like the parade to come off as a message that this is China telling you that, look, we're pulling out the big guns. We have them. We can use them. And most importantly, the Chinese people have the spirit and the resilience to be able to deal with whatever's to come. So this kind of internal narrativization of such a parade is very important, because it effectively communicates to the people that, look, the party has everything under control. And so the people were being constantly told about how we've done this in 1944-45 against the Japanese, we can do it again. So and of course the parade very importantly pays homage to veterans, which is again an
Mhm.
important point of concern for the CCP, because all these policies have come out in the past year about the resettlement of veterans, giving them relief, giving their families relief. Because if there are no perks to being in the PLA, you can't really induce a sense of honor and mission. I mean, it's one of the pillars of inducing honor and mission in the military. So, especially considering the PLA is very important to the CCP today. So, that's the on the whole the message to the people, the party, and the military itself. Then if we look at the message communicated to the allies, many of whom were present at the parade, uh, I think what the Chinese are effectively telling them is that, look, if there comes a time of need, you're seeing the discipline and the mission that the PLA is demonstrating today, and if
Mhm.
necessary, we will come to your aid, as it were,
Mhm.
if that's required. And this is something that Chinese political scholars have articulated as well, in these specific terms, that look, this is a show of strength, not just to rivals and enemies, but also to allies, so that they know just how disciplined the force is. And speaking of that discipline, I think the primary message to rivals was that, look, this is something that you cannot achieve because there's no other force in the world like the PLA. In fact, there's an article that came out on the 4th of September in in the Chinese media platform Quancha. And what that article argued was that sometime back, Trump tried to do a military parade. And the only
Mhm.
question he could answer was whether or not to have the parade, and not what kind of a parade it should be or what should be put on force. Because he just can't fathom if the force will be this disciplined and have this sense of a mission like the PLA does. So I think what then they're effectively communicating to countries like the US is that you can never achieve this level of mission, honor, and discipline. And these are our big guns, and you should be afraid of them. And that's exactly what the weapon systems formation achieved to do as well. There were different formations, and we can get to this, but they focused on everything from ballistic missiles, nuclear missiles, submarines, air power, to robots, laser weapons, and so on and so forth. So it was all stops pulled kind of an event, and you can see how it would definitely ruffle some feathers in capitals like Washington and even New Delhi, given the kind of military threat they perceive China to be posing.
Mhm. So it's two questions come up here. You mentioned that China is telling its allies, its friends, its partners, whatever, that if you are in trouble, China is there ready to help. Is this? I mean, I saw North Korea's leader over there. We saw the Belarusian president also. Two people who don't figure very highly in the Western favoritism brackets.
Right.
Are you saying that China is laying it out explicitly that we will come to your aid in the event of something going wrong?
Right. So I think in practice, China's preferred method to support some of these countries would always be either economic or in terms of trade and defense. Of course, with
Hmm.
Belarus, we see that China regularly conducts jointness and interoperability military exercises, and not just with
Hmm.
the formal armed forces, but also with the police in things like
I see.
surveillance and patrolling. So,
Hmm.
North Korea, those exercises are not that pronounced, but we know that China and North Korea share close ties, especially in defense equipment. And China has regularly supplied North Korea with defense tech. And we know the history of how North Korea's nuclear program has been assisted by Beijing. So, in that sense, I think. Precedent dictates that that would be China's preferred method of support. Even with Russia, I think it's more been about exporting dual use components that would go into its military industrial complex rather than having troops on the ground, or export of turnkey products like the complete fighter jet or the complete tank, right? And
Mhm.
countries like Russia wouldn't especially need it. But if it comes to it, maybe Belarus and North Korea might just see a more extensive show of Chinese support, which includes troops on the ground. But I guess today there's no hard and fast way to tell, except
Mhm.
looking at the past. And from the past, we see that the Chinese are a lot of talk sometimes, and sometimes very little substance. And that would effectively mean that look, what our arsenal is like and what the commitment of our troops is, but they would rather prefer staying out of direct
Out.
involvement and rather support with the other thing that makes them powerful, which is exports, production, so on and so
So
forth.
something like what we saw in the case of Pakistan during Op Sindoor, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a classic example. In fact, the again, looking at what Chinese commentators had to say about Pakistan's kind of air power projections during the skirmishes between India and Pakistan, they were effectively calling Pakistan's arsenal made in China. And
Mm.
to a great degree, rightfully so, because you saw ground-based air defense was the HQ-16s and the HQ-9P, and HQ-9P
Yeah.
is specifically made for Pakistan. Then there was the PL-15E missile, and even the J-10 fighter jets, right? So that comprehensive kind of arsenal just for air power was
Hmm.
all Chinese. And now one can argue whether that was the best quality product, and I would argue no, right? Because all of these are export variants that were
Hmm.
given to Pakistan, the J-10 CE and the HQ-9P. So all of these are either made for Pakistan or export variants. But and even the PL-15, it's PL-15E used by Pakistan. The range was much lesser as compared to what the PLA uses. And yet, for whatever reason and whatever transpired during the skirmishes, the Chinese counted it as a win and said that, look, this is the demonstration of what China can do, and this is China's military effectively succeeding. So, of
Hmm.
course, a lot of talk, but yeah,
And
whether if
and
PLA, we don't know if firstly, we don't know if there will ever be a situation where the dire need comes for PLA troops to be on the ground. Even with
yeah,
Russia, we haven't seen that situation come about.
yeah,
And
yeah.
secondly, if it comes to it, we don't know if China would really contribute or want to get involved that way.
And they haven't fought a war in more than 40 years, 45 years.
Right. Yeah.
I
I
mean, they're
mean,
not
yeah.
tested in that sense.
Yeah, I think the last time they conventionally fought a long drawn war was in, as you said, the North versus South Vietnam situation.
Hmm.
And yet, I think the one thing that we should take away is that they're trying really hard to bridge the gaps that they can recognize. And I think
Hmm.
that's the endeavor. What does the PLA do on a day to day basis? Their endeavor is to train in combat like many other military forces, but they also have the assurance that maybe they fought a war and it has gone well for them. But for the PLA, there's no way to say. So what they'll do is they will conduct an exercise, they will do an assessment afterward, and interestingly, these reports are available with a
Hmm.
little hard look. And you'll see that in the assessment, sometimes they'll even say that, look, we failed in making a certain drone unit reach Tibet in time to give the troops
Hmm.
the gear they needed to sustain a winter war. And that would be the goal of their exercise. And they'd say that they failed because the pilots, the drone operators were not skilled enough. So, from that, you can
Hmm.
see two things. One is that they recognize the gaps that they have and they're trying to bridge it. And two, where the gaps themselves are. Now, if they're training in those, you might want to at least match that kind
Yeah.
of base foundational kind of layer, and then you can supersede it with your own capabilities.
Mhm. So, next question. Given the kind of platforms and weapons we saw on display at the parade, what is the kind of war that China is preparing for?
Right. So I think there were a bunch of weapon systems and equipment on display, and I won't get into all of them, of course, but I think a
Yeah.
few things to take away. One was about the emphasis on manned, unmanned, or human machine teaming. This is a concept that's becoming really important in what we would understand as new age warfare, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of countries are drawing lessons from how Russia and Ukraine have used drones for aerial superiority and even for destruction of tanks, right? So for the Chinese, this is again a very important point of emphasis. And subsequently, then we saw at the parade that they had an arsenal to display of the drones that they use, of how they have these robotic wolves that would collaborate with human personnel during gunfight. So, and
Mhm.
in all of this, one thing can be taken away, that the PLA is no longer trying to be a force which is just quantity. And the theaterization itself spoke to that. But with this parade, we know that they're very serious about it, because there
Mhm.
were a lot of layoffs in the process of theaterization. And yet, with the parade, we know that it's all about becoming a quality force over anything else. So they are more than happy to have drones do ISR, even engage in the kill chain if it's a very dire situation, and then humans come in and do the trick as necessary. So even with the robotic wolves doing the gunfights, they will be the first line of defense. At least that's what the goal was to show. Then with the drones, I think there were two major ones on display. One was the GJ11 Sharp Sword,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
there was the Wing Loom 1E, right? And these are big drones. They have significant payload capacity and endurance as well, up to, I think, 10 or 20 hours. So these are then drones that are used for either ISR, or they would be even used to engage in the kill chain, which means finding the target, attacking it, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
And one thing that was emphasized that was interesting at this event was something known as digital empowerment of equipment. That essentially, that as a concept, it has only been previously used in the context of industrialization in China. But first time we're seeing it used in the military domain, which effectively means that any
Autonomous.
information, yeah, any information system connected to the internet should also be autonomous, and vice versa. Any autonomous
Ex-
system should be connected to the internet of things, and it should be able to communicate with others on one battle link, as it were. So I think
Mhm.
that was an emphasis. And on other two other things interesting in the equipments projected was, one was jointness, and the other was reach, right? So on jointness, this was also the first time that we saw a joint aircraft formation of the Navy and the Army Air Force,
Mhm.
which was J-16s of the Air Force in collaboration with the Y series of patrol aircraft of the Navy. So the Y
Mhm.
series have one aircraft for submarine hunting, one aircraft for reconnaissance, and I think another for electromagnetic operations, where they need to block disruptive uh, radio waves or communication signals, right? So
Mhm.
these surveillance aircraft, when combined with J-16, can make a pretty strong aerial arsenal. Of course, efficacy of all of these things has to be proven, but
Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah.
finally, on reach, just a quick point about the newly unveiled missile variant of the Dongfeng 5. So we saw the Dongfeng 5C being unveiled. And firstly, to me at least, what is interesting is that this is a liquid fueled missile instead of a rocket fueled missile, even though we know
Mhm.
that solid fuel, pardon me, is cheaper and it has lesser prep time, and liquid fuel
Yeah.
can take as long as 30 to 40 minutes to load and then prep the missile. And yet, commentators after the parade were confident that Dongfeng 5C is going to be on launch on warning. It's going to be on full alert all the time. So that was an important narrative to take away, that
Mhm.
even though it's liquid fueled, you should be prepared for it to counterattack whenever necessary and counter strike when necessary. So that if true, then that could significantly mean the Chinese telling you that we have missiles that will be launched on warning, and if we detect even a glimmer of kind of something
Mhm.
incoming, Dongfeng 5C will be the first line of defense. Of course,
So
again, if
they, they are looking at kind of a remote scenario, maybe like what we saw in Sindoor, standoff range, electronic warfare, that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah. In fact, for them, winning the information based warfare is the first priority, and then having the troops on ground and the and tanks and
Uh-huh.
artillery and gunfight is secondary. Even though they train
Mhm.
for that as well, for them it's important to have cyber forces on the ready, electromagnetic warfare to be top notch, and the cyberspace to be cleared of any information overload or misinformation. And for that, to that end, even troops and tanks are being quote unquote informationized. So you will see
Mhm.
tanks instead. So what they're doing, and this is something that was an emphasis at the parade as well, is that they have tanks that are thinner So medium or lightweight tanks that aren't essentially very thick in their armor, but they're equipped with electro-optical sensors. So the goal is
Mhm.
it's necessary. It's essentially prevention and not cure. So they think
Mhm.
that if the tank has these sensors, it can just find if there is any aerial incoming attack from a drone or from artillery, and the tank will shoot it back. So now they're saying that, listen, we're not worried about the tank getting destructed because we have these sensors that will tell us, and we'll
Mhm.
react preemptively. So that focus on informatization and on winning quote unquote local wars is something that they
Mhm.
persistently emphasize.
So, are they primarily looking at South China Sea in those areas, which is
Yeah.
contiguous to their mainland and all? That's where they expect Taiwan,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Yeah, I think their fundamental priority are the naval theaters such as Taiwan and South China Sea, and I. I believe from what they do in practice, their goal is essentially to make sure that it doesn't come to conventional war, and they can
Mhm.
use sub-conventional methods, gray zone operations, or salami slicing, whatever one would prefer to call it, to first establish dominance and preponderance. And if that is done, then they don't need to go to the invasion or the annexation bit, which is why with the
Mhm.
Taiwan scenario, always also I always say, I mean, this is what I argue, is that we should worry about invasion less and countering the gray zone methods and the subconventional methods more. Because if they can
Mhm. Yes.
clear out Taiwanese defenses and make sure that there is a significant shift in perception, then they might not even need to come to invasion. And I
Mhm.
don't think that that's their priority at this juncture as well. So yeah,
Mhm.
they might want to develop a blue water navy, and they want to do operations in the Gulf of Aden. But even with Russia and Ukraine, we know that these are not theaters that they want to get involved in. They want to focus
Yeah.
on what comes to them, have their core issues settled, and then just have the capability to project if necessary.
Mhm. Interesting, interesting. So when we look at what we do and what I'm not talking of the parades that we do on Republic Day, but what lessons can India draw from this?
Yeah. So I think it was interesting that Prime Minister Narendra Modi was not at the parade. I'm not sure
Mhm.
if there was an invite or not, but let's assume there was. And so his decision to not stay back for that is significant, because, at least to me, because it tells you that such shows of force, especially at a time when India China relations aren't mended and probably never will be, because there's a significant
Yeah.
lack of trust still going on, it has ruffled some feathers, right? And so I'm sure that the armed forces or government officials were looking at the parade intently, even though officially we avoid making
Yeah.
comments like this.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yes, the fact that there were many heads of state there, and Prime Minister Modi wasn't, speaks
Mhm.
something at least to the Indian audience about them keeping China at bay and not necessarily projecting bonhomie. And as to what we can learn, I think there are two aspects. One pertains to the first pertains to theaterization, right? So as you must be observing, there's a debate
Hmm.
going on currently that does India need theaterization and jointness?
Hmm.
And if I'm not wrong, the Air Force chief said that that's not necessary, not for our context. The Navy chief defended
Hmm.
the decision to theatrize. And this is the kind of back and forth that's necessary, especially considering we're not a country like China, where it's a top-down decision. Today you're the PLA, today you're the People's Army, and tomorrow you're the PLAs. Oh, just as an
Yeah.
example. So we
Hmm.
need to take the opinions of the defense chiefs and the officials into account. That said, a while ago, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh said that theatrization for countries can take up to 2 decades. So I think, as important as this debate is today,
Hmm.
if we have to, we must start now. And I think theaterization has immense benefits. At least what the Chinese are trying to say to anyone is the US has a theater model, Russia has a theater model, with differences here and there, and
Yeah.
and China does too. And what that does is it enables the Navy to be able to use the Air Force's helicopters, if
Assets. Yeah. Hmm.
and for whatever, the army to be able to use a carrier kind of deck for something else, right?
Hmm.
A land based operation. So
Yeah.
uh, if this is the kind of jointness we're hoping to achieve, especially considering both our continental and maritime borders are always perturbed, then we must
Yeah.
start now. And that's, I think, a lesson that we should draw from the parade. Did the parade um, effectively show that the Chinese can do theaterization and jointness in specific well, or is that something that we don't want to match, or we can match it without theaterization? So that's a question I think we must consider the answers to in the aftermath of the parade. The other thing is about, I think, skill training, and focusing on new age warfare, right? So um, this is not to say that the submarines or the naval platforms that we don't already have may not be enough, but because of the low production costs in China, they're always experimenting with something new, and that indigenization
Mm-hmm.
has enabled them to churn this equipment. And in India, indigenization is a slow process, it's happening. But last I heard, there were 5,012 items on our positive indigenization lists, and we're far cry away from the deadlines we gave
Yeah,
ourselves. Some of them were
yeah.
to be indigenized by the end of 2025, and we've not even met half that list for the end of 2025, right? So it's a slow process, but for how long? So I think that's another thing that we need to look just at the sheer strength, because, well, I personally
Yeah.
believe that strength is a quality of its own, because you have more to lose. You have more to lose easily. So I think those were the two things pertaining to jointness and indigenization that I would really think that our armed forces and government officials should take seriously.
Mhm. So, last question. When you read the kind of stories about our military preparation, readiness, some talk about new ships joining and smaller battalions and all that. Are we on the same path as the Chinese are, or are they many, many years ahead of us? Because they seem
Right.
to be talking about very networked kind of armed forces. I'm not sure we are on the same page.
Well, networked is like hitting the head on the nail, right? Because that's exactly what it is. And now again, we can assure ourselves to a great degree that because the Chinese haven't been in battle, that experience in and of itself could be a hindering factor to everything else that they do. And we've had our experiences with Pakistan. We are definitely more battle hardened in India. We're a more
Yeah.
battle hardened force, and yet I think victory in battle would be a culmination of the quality and quantity of equipment, the mission, the sense of mission the troops feel. I'm sure there's no kind of less or more there. I know for a fact that Indian armed forces are very committed and have a deep sense of honor and mission. But I think some of the debates that perhaps we should have had, and this report, the Kargil report, consistently comes up, right? These were the reforms that were
Hmm.
suggested, and we're halfway there, we're nowhere there. But the conversation is getting delayed a bit much. So what do we need to do? We need a singular battlefield network. We need private firms to be able to help us induct faster, and yet we see that, it's Cochin shipyard, or Garden shipyard, or Goa, that's always the preference for the Navy, right? And I understand that there's a comfort with DPSUs, but and because, precisely because we don't have a system like China, we're a little late on integrating the private sector. Because for China, it's a wake up and tell them to do thing. For us,
Yeah.
it will take much longer. So again, at this juncture, because there's no evidence, I won't make the case that they're many years ahead of us or not. We have our own qualities, they have their own. But I think we're a little late on some very important conversations, and there is definitely an element of jointness lacking. We don't have, for example, an information support force that will fight on a joint front, right? The Navy will have its own cyber capabilities, the Army will have its own cyber capabilities, but we need that joint kind of force that can fight for all of them in one domain together, even as the other theaters or the other services do their own thing. So I would say that that's where our delays are, and that's where we need to kind of buckle up.
Focus on. Anushka, fascinating to listen to all this, and let's hope we are on the right track and learning the right lessons from what the parade put out. Thanks very
Right.
much. Lovely talking to you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
That's all we have for you on this edition of The Gist. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media. Thank you.